Right. So today we're doing things a little bit differently. It's going to be like an audiobook review kind of, but instead of just like, giving you the summary, we're really going to dive into some of the insights from the book itself. The book is Rabi'a, The Woman Who Must Be Heard by Clarke Wadsworth. And it's this really incredible look into the life and teachings of this early Muslim mystic named Rabi'a al-Adawiyya. So if you've ever wanted to quickly get a deep understanding of a really important early mystic figure, stick with us.
Yeah, I mean, Rabia lived from 17 to 1 AD. And she wasn't just, some random person in history. She was known for her just incredibly intense devotion and her love for God. So in this deep dive, we're going to be pulling out kind of like the absolute core of Wadsworth's research and study, giving you the essential understanding of why Rabia matters, even now, without you having to go through all the pages yourself.
And Wadsworth's book is really cool because it's not just a biography, right? She digs into Rabi'a's spiritual teachings, using a ton of historical research, and then weaving in these really beautiful, timeless stories. Our mission in this deep dive is to kind of pull out the most impactful, interesting, nuggets from this study and explore who Rabi'a was, what her journey of spiritual growth looked like, and maybe even more importantly, what her insights might offer for your own understanding of devotion and your own inner life.
So to really appreciate Rabi'a and her perspective, you kind of got to set the scene, right? The book emphasizes that she lived in the 2nd century after the Prophet Muhammad's death. Now, this period, according to some recent historical research that Wadsworth highlights, was a time when women could actually be recognized as official religious teachers within Islam.
Yeah, and Rabi'a herself was a part of a vibrant community of female ascetics in Basra, which is in modern-day Iraq. And the book gets into this really interesting concept, these women choosing to be, as they phrased it, slaves of God. Now, it's important to understand that this wasn't about some sort of literal servitude. It was more a conscious spiritual path, which, it might surprise you to know, gave them a good amount of independence and respect within their society.
Totally. By dedicating themselves in this way, these women actually gained freedoms that weren't often, available to women in other contexts. They could travel by themselves, interact socially with men, teach publicly, and pursue their own intellectual development.
It's interesting. It really challenges some of the more simplistic assumptions we might have about women's roles back then. And within this community, it seems that Rabi'a may have even had her own teacher, we'll name Hayuna. Wadsworth describes Hayuna as one of the wise fools, and these are people known for their really overwhelming, almost ecstatic love of God. There's a really beautiful story where Hayuna wakes Rabi'a up in the middle of the night. She says, "Get up, the wedding of the guided ones has come. Oh, you who beautifies the brides of the night through your night vigils." It gives you a sense of the importance of personal devotion in their lives.
Yeah, and for you, what's really important to keep in mind is that Rabia's profound spiritual understanding was recognized and respected, even by like the leading male religious scholars of her time. Wadsworth mentions al-Muhasibi, a well-known mystic who lived a little after Rabia, and he actually recorded her saying, "Rabia al-Abadiyya would say at the coming of night, 'The night has come, the darkness has mingled, and every lover is left alone with his beloved. Now I am alone with you, my beloved.'" This early acknowledgement of Rabia really highlights her influence, even way back then.
Wadsworth also looks closely at Farid-ud-Din Attar's Memorial of God's Friends, which was written about 400 years after Rabi'a lived. This is one of the main sources we have for information about her, but the author does point out something really important for us to remember. It's possible that Attar might have kind of combined stories and sayings from different women mystics who shared the same name, Rabi'a, over time. And the phrase slave of God could have been interpreted more literally by later writers than it was in Rabi'a's own time.
Right, right. So while Attar's work was super important in making Rabia kind of this central figure in Sufism, it's important to remember that interpretations can evolve over time, and different stories might have gotten kind of mixed together. Wadsworth's book helps us see those layers.
Okay, so let's go a little bit deeper into the core of Rabi'a's teachings, which is where it gets really interesting. And that is the concept of stations.
Yeah, so Wadsworth uses this Sufi idea of stations to kind of explore Rabia's spiritual journey. Now, think of these stations as like consistent, permanent states of being that are achieved through spiritual practice, through love, sincere effort, and really importantly, divine grace. And these stations are different from states, which are more like temporary, fleeting moments of spiritual insight or feeling.
And according to Wadsworth's analysis of her teachings, Rabi'a progressed through 17 of these stations, moving from outward asceticism to this incredible state of unity with God. While the exact sequence she went through is, not completely known, it's clear she had mastered this whole spectrum.
Wadsworth organizes these 17 stations into 4 chapters, which is really helpful for us. The first is called The Journey from Asceticism to Loving Union, and it looks at stations like uh, giving up worldly attachments, sincere repentance, embracing a kind of spiritual poverty, and being really attentive to your actions. This first phase is all about letting go of the material world and turning your attention to the divine.
Then the book goes into From Fear to Trust and Oneness, which explores stations like having a healthy fear of God, developing hope, cultivating deep patience, putting your complete trust in God, and then finally that feeling of divine unity.
The third chapter is deepening the relationship with God, and it goes into stations that nurture a closer, more personal connection. This includes developing complete sincerity and truthfulness, building that close, loving relationship with the divine, feeling a deep longing for God, and, cultivating humility.
And then lastly, there's the final stations to divine union. This chapter explores the deepest levels of spiritual achievement. It talks about things like expressing constant gratitude, feeling totally content with God's will, experiencing love in its purest form, going through the annihilation of the ego, which means, completely transcending your individual self, and finally, subsisting only in God, which is, a state of complete unity.
And Wadsworth really brings these stations to life by starting each section with a direct quote or teaching from Rabi'a herself. They're not just, these abstract concepts. They're grounded in her own words.
Exactly. And the book starts with this amazing quote on humility. I ask God's forgiveness for my lack of truthfulness in saying, I ask God's forgiveness. Just think about that for a second. That's like deep self-awareness. What does that tell us about true humility?
It's so striking. She's not just acknowledging a mistake. She's questioning her own sincerity and asking for forgiveness. It makes you think about how the ego can creep into even our most, religious actions. It makes you examine your own motivations.
Totally. And then when talking about sincerity and truthfulness, Rabi'a says, asking for mercy with the tongue is the business of liars.
That's pretty straightforward. What does that tell us about how we think about asking for forgiveness?
For me, it challenges the idea of just going through the motions. It suggests that truly asking for forgiveness isn't just saying the words, but about a real, genuine inner change. It makes you wonder, how often are we just going through the motions without changing on the inside?
Makes you think. Now, about patience, the book shares this quote. If patience were a man, he would be generous. And then there's this powerful story about when Rabi'a was sick. When Sufyan suggested that she prays for relief, her response was, "Oh, Sufyan, don't you know that the real Most High has willed my pain?" And when he agreed, she said, "You know this, and still you tell me to request what is at odds with his will. It is not proper to be at odds with the friend." That's radical acceptance right there. Yeah, absolutely. Her understanding of patience wasn't about just gritting your teeth and bearing it. It was about aligning yourself with what she saw as God's will. She saw her suffering not as something to avoid, but as part of a deeper connection with God, the friend.
Right. In the chapter about repentance, there's this exchange where a man asked Rabi'a if God would turn to him if he repented after all the sins he had committed. And her answer is no. Only if he were to turn to you, then you would be able to turn to him. That's really different from how we usually think about repenting.
Yeah, what's interesting here is that the Arabic word for repentance, tawbah, emphasizes a transformation, a return to God, rather than just dwelling on the past. Rabia's answer shows that even the ability to turn to God is a kind of divine grace. It's not something you can just force on your own.
And then there's this incredible story about divine unity and love. Rabi'a is asked if she loves God and hates Satan. And she says, out of love of the compassionate, I have no occasion for hatred toward Satan. Love of the real has so pervaded me that there is no place in my heart for the love or hatred of another. That's like next level, all-encompassing love.
Yeah, it's really remarkable. It's not just loving the good and hating the bad. It's a love that goes beyond those categories. It seems like her whole being was filled with love for God, so there was simply no space left for anything negative, not even towards what we traditionally see as evil.
And finally, there's this conversation with Salih al-Muri where he says, he who persists in knocking at the door will have it open for him. And Rabia's reply is, the door is already open, but the question is, who wishes to enter it? It makes you think about whether you really want to take that step.
Totally. It's not just about how much effort you're putting in. It's about whether you're ready to receive what's already there. The invitation is always open, but are you willing to accept it?
So as we've gone through all of this, all these insights from Rabia's life and teachings through Wadsworth's book, it makes you really think.
What does real humility look like in your life? How can you be more sincere in what you do? What does your patience look like when things are tough? How do you see the balance between your own actions and what might be divine grace in your life? And why is Rabi's radical love so powerful, even today?
Those are exactly the questions that Rabia's life and her teachings, as presented in Wadsworth's book, encourage us to think about. Her journey, the way Wadsworth presents it, is a really strong example of devotion and a deep understanding of the spiritual path. She was clearly a respected figure who achieved what people believe is a deep and lasting connection with God.
So to wrap up, let's leave you with one final thought. Think about that door that Rabia talked about, the one that's already open. What might that represent for you, in your own world? What does it mean for you to really want to go through that door? And what would it look like for you to cultivate a love so strong that it changes how you see and experience everything around you? Maybe going back to our goal of understanding devotion in our own inner lives through Rabia's story can give us some really valuable insights.
And if you're interested in learning more, Wadsworth's book, Rabi'a, The Woman Who Must Be Heard, is definitely worth checking out. It's a great place to keep exploring.